A cold morning on the Saint-Lambert-sur-Dives road in mid-August 1944. By noon, German road column doctrine no longer worked. The reason fit inside a 60-pound rocket head hanging under the wing of a Hawker Typhoon. 8 iron cylinders fell like a low-flying sledgehammer and turned soft skins and guns into wreckage. Tanks kept moving, but morale cracked first. Subscribe, new evidence first, World War II videos every day. The date was the 14th of August, 1944. The hour was shortly after 7 in the morning. Low clouds sat at under 1,000 feet, and a light drizzle hung over the Dives River. The pin was the road net between Troon, Chambois, and Saint-Lambert-sur-Dives. The ground was hard-packed dirt and macadam, lined by hedges and narrow culverts. The old rule said columns could move in daylight if they spread out, hid under trees, and posted light flak. A few fighter bombers with bombs were a risk, but near misses did little to armor. Crews believed a moving tank shrugged off fragments. Drivers kept 20 to 30 meters between trucks. The doctrine came from years of marching and weeks of retreat. The surprise mechanic came in low from the west. A Typhoon of the 2nd Tactical Air Force flew below 800 feet, lined up along the road, and released a ripple of 8 rockets. Each rocket carried a 60-pound high-explosive or semi-armor-piercing head. In under 2 seconds, a lane 200 to 300 yards long filled with detonations. A single metric told the effect. At 1,000 yards firing range, dispersion in the rocket pattern covered roughly 30 to 50 yards either side of aim. Soft skins in that strip turned into scrap. A gun tractor hit by a semi-armor-piercing head burned fast. A bridge approach blocked by 2 wrecks stopped everything behind it within minutes. That was the Sledgehammer. The place mattered. The Falaise pocket was closing. On the 12th, 13th, and 14th of August, 1944, German units of 5th Panzer Army and 7th Army pushed east toward the Seine crossings. The road near Saint-Lambert-sur-Dives ran between the Dive River and small orchards. Every culvert and bend was pre-registered by Allied observers. Photographs from tactical reconnaissance showed convoy densities at 1 lorry every 6 to 10 vehicle lengths. One witness object fixed the break with ink and numbers. An operational research section summary from 2nd Tactical Air Force for the period 15 to 22 August logged sortie times, altitudes, and strike results on the Troon-Chambois road net. Aerial reconnaissance photos taken before noon on the 14th showed 3 burned soft skins and 2 disabled anti-tank guns within 200 yards of a culvert south of Saint-Lambert. A captured ferry manifest from the Seine later listed delayed crossings for formations named in those photos. The chain from picture to paper was tight. The old rule also assumed bombs were the main air threat. The Typhoon did carry bombs, but the rocket projectile, called RP-3 for a 3-inch motor, replaced bomb runs under low cloud. The rockets did not need a steep dive. They worked from shallow angles at 30 degrees or less. In weather that grounded medium bombers, rocket-armed Typhoons still flew. A terrain constraint shaped everything. Hedgerows and tree lines hid guns, but also trapped smoke. When a rocket truck burned at a choke point, the haze sat at hedge height and spread along the lane. The next salvo fired into smoke. That cut accuracy but made crews break. The pause made a second pass easier. The first pass broke metal. The second pass broke movement. There was a logistics line behind each rocket pass. Advanced landing grounds, like B-8 at Sommervieux and B-42 at Bazenville, kept fuel and warheads within a short haul by lorry. Ground crews could reload 8 rails in around 20 to 30 minutes if the fuses were set in advance. A maintenance card from an armament section recorded misfires as 1 in 10 on wet mornings. Armorers logged each dud on the card by tail serial. A myth built during the week said rockets destroyed most tanks in the pocket. The evidence did not bear that out. The operational research section counted many burned tanks as scuttled or hit by ground guns. Gun camera film and crater surveys tied most rocket kills to soft skins, guns, and parked vehicles. The morale effect, however, was out of scale with the metal count. Drivers left cabs. Gun crews ran from trails. That was written in prisoner interrogations preserved with the AAR pages. By sunset on the 14th of August, 1944, the old convoy rhythm was gone. German march tables printed for 10-kilometer-hour speeds no longer matched road truth. Bridges across the dives saw clots, not streams. The surprise mechanic sat in 8 gray cylinders and a firing switch that could empty them in a breath. The contradiction at the edge of the scene was quiet. The ambush lanes were not random. They had been plotted from photo runs and artillery maps 2 days earlier, and the Typhoons were called by forward air controllers on known roads. The last pass of the day came at around 1900 hours above the Saint-Lambert ford. The weather lifted to 1,500 feet, and short shadows reached across the hedge gaps. The guns on the ground still fired, but the men under the trees watched the rails under the wings more than the silhouette of the fighter. The old rule of road movement under cover had been erased in hours by a weapon small enough to carry in 4s or 8s. The human lever had a name and a desk. Air Vice Marshal Harry Broadhurst commanded 83 Group of the 2nd Tactical Air Force in Normandy. His operations staff at Group headquarters near Caen saw the pocket form on situation maps on the 11th and 12th of August, 1944. The order to concentrate rocket-armed Typhoons on road nets inside the pocket moved from his table down the chain in a single afternoon. The paper path was simple. Group operations drafted a directive for road interdiction with rockets under low cloud. It went to 121 Wing, 198 Squadron, 247 Squadron, and 609 Squadron, among others. Wing operations issued timings and target boxes keyed to map references south of Troon and east of Argentan. Rover control teams with the Canadian and Polish ground forces took the other end of the line, a forward air controller codenamed on the Rover. David Nett took calls from Brigade HQ west of Chambois. He sat with a field telephone and a very high-frequency set. He had artillery fire plans on his knee and aerial photo mosaics pinned under a map board. When a column moved, he called the cab rank, which was a stack of Typhoons orbiting at around 1,000 to 1,500 feet. The order used short words: road, bend, culvert, smoke. An obstacle stood in the way on the 13th of August. Cloud and drizzle tied down bomb-carrying fighter bombers and medium bombers. Rocket rails needed specific loading and fuse settings for either high explosive or semi-armor-piercing heads. Many pilots had more practice with bombs than rockets. The training lag was real. It showed in early wide patterns and high release points. The obstacle was pushed aside by a decision to accept lower accuracy in exchange for tempo. Group sent a training note to the wings: fire rockets in pairs along road axes at shallow angle and low height, and do not waste passes trying to pick out single tanks unless cloud opened. The note cited range tables drawn in March 1944 and recent gunnery range results showing best patterns at under 1,000 yards. The risk to aircraft was acknowledged in a single sentence and accepted. A logistics vignette sat at the other end of the runway. Armorers at B-8 Summerview started their day before sunrise on the 14th. They staged 60-pound heads by the racks in clusters of 8. They set nose fuses to point detonating for soft skin work. A corporal checked continuity on each rail with a hand tester and signed a maintenance line. A fuel bowser topped each aircraft. A production tally sheet stamped by an equipment officer showed the drawdown of heads from depot stocks that week. Cost was part of the lever. A 60-pound head with a 3-inch motor was cheaper than a 500-pound bomb when factory labor hours were counted. Royal Ordnance set unit hours for the head and the case. The Royal Aircraft Establishment and the Projectile Development Establishment had already sunk the design labor by 1943. The per-shot cost in money and time was low enough to fire 4 to 8 rockets per sortie as standard, which Group made explicit. The inventor side of the lever reached back 2 years. Engineers at Farnborough and Aberporth had tested the RP-3 against plates and earth revetments in 1942 and 1943. Firing tables entered the squadron line books in early 1944. When the order came at Falaise, the system was not new. What changed was concentration in space and time under cloud. A test card dated May 1944 from an armament squadron listed functioning at 8 out of 10 when properly fused. That figure informed the risk calculation. There was a myth on the table, too. Some staff officers still argued that rockets were for ships or tanks in open ground only. The evidence from the Caen-Falaise road in June and July showed otherwise. Unit AAR pages from number 1. 9-8 Squadron recorded soft-skin kills and gun positions destroyed with rockets where bombs could not be used because of cloud and civilians. The decision point took the evidence and wrote it into an order. The decision that set the rollout in motion came late on the 13th of August. 83 Group consolidated rocket stocks forward and tasked 2 wings to hold cab ranks from first light to last light on the 14th, 15th, and 16th. Advanced landing grounds shuffled refuel and rearm slots to keep a turnaround under 40 minutes. Rover control posts got extra batteries and extra lines. The order used few words but fixed times, places, and altitudes in ink. By the evening of the 14th of August, 1944, the lever had moved the line. Reports from Polish 1st Armored Division near Chambois called down strikes on the road north of Saint-Lambert twice in an hour. Canadian units on the Troon axis did the same. Gun camera film developed that night showed the ripple flashes marching along road edges at hedge height. The decision had made a map pin into a kill lane. Training adjustments followed within a day. A short note from a wing commander told pilots to aim not at leading vehicles, but at the second and third in line to trap the rest. Another line told them to expend all 8 rockets in 1 or 2 long ripples rather than in singles. The note cited 2 gun camera frames and 1 aerial mosaic as witness. On the 15th of August, 1944, that technique closed a bend near Magny for over an hour. The human lever thus sat at a desk, in a rover pit, and on a dispersal pan. A signature at group, a hand on a field telephone, a boot on a wing root, and a chalked fuse setting. The chain reduced theory to a low-flying sledgehammer. The pocket did not close because of rockets alone, but movement inside it slowed in measurable steps that matched sortie logs, AAR pages, and reconnaissance photos. The system had 4 main parts: the aircraft, the rails, the rocket projectile, and the sighting and firing method. The aircraft was the Hawker Typhoon, a single-engine fighter with thick wings that carried 4 rails per side. The rails held 3-inch rocket motors that pushed a 60-pound warhead. The warhead came in high explosive for soft targets and semi-armor piercing for harder skins. The rocket projectile, called RP-3, used a solid propellant motor with simple electrical ignition. A lead ran from the cockpit trigger through a selector to the rails. The pilot could fire in pairs or in a full ripple. In practice over the Falaise roads, pairs and half ripples came first, and then full ripples followed on a second pass. All 8 rockets could leave the rails in under 2 seconds if the pilot held the button down. The sight was simple. A reflector gun sight presented a ring and dot. Range for rockets was not computed by a fancy device. Pilots used range tables that matched speed, dive angle, and target size to an aim point. The best results came from shallow dives at around 30 degrees, with release between 600 and 1,000 yards, and with the aircraft at 500 to 1,000 feet. A range table dated March of 1944 lay in the line book as a witness object, its margins smudged by fingers. Reliability sat in 2 numbers. Motor ignition worked at around 9 and 10 when rails were clean and connections tight. Fuse functioning sat at around 8 and 10 when set to point detonating for soft skins and when heads were dry. In wet weather, misfires and duds rose. Maintenance cards kept by armament sections listed each misfire by aircraft serial. Those cards were witness objects too. The method in the pocket was not single-target sniping. It was area denial along a road axis. A pair of Typhoons lined up along the road, not across it. The first aircraft aimed a ripple at the second or third truck to block the lane. The second aimed up the line to increase scatter among trailers and gun crews. The goal was to block, not to count kills. A wing AAR page for the 14th of August made that aim explicit with 1 line underlined. Constraints came with the method. Low cloud cap dives at under 1,000 feet. Crosswinds pushed rockets off the aim line. Tree bursts from flak-forced early releases. Fuel margins shrank when aircraft loitered for cab rank calls. Each constraint showed in logs and photos, and none of them removed the basic effect on road movement. Pilots recorded release heights and wind notes in their combat reports. A decoded signal summary of rover calls showed delays and redirects caused by weather. A training vignette shows how crews adapted. At an advanced landing ground west of Bayeux on the 12th of August, an instructor led a dusk talk beside a Typhoon with empty rails. He chalked a stick figure road on the tarmac, marked a bend, and showed how a shallow track over the hedges kept the aim point stable. He told the pilots to hold the sight low on the verge, not on the cab of a truck, because the rocket climbed slightly after launch. The note came from a typed sheet filed in the squadron binder, and the tone was terse. A myth clung to the weapon and needed correction. Many believed a single 60-pound rocket would pierce tank armor from any angle. Tests at Aberporth and Farnborough had shown different. Semi-armor-piercing heads worked on thin overhead plates and on light armor. They struggled against thick frontal plates unless the angle and range were favorable. Operational research after the pocket counted few tank kills by rockets. The evidence, not the myth, informed later aiming guidance. How it was used day to day followed a clock. At first light, one cab rank already circled at 1,000 feet over a map box. A rover controller with the Canadian Corps called the first strikes between 6 and 7 in the morning on the 14th. Turnaround times at B-8 sat around 40 minutes with good ground discipline. Each aircraft flew 3 to 5 sorties in a long day. A production tally sheet logged rocket heads loaded per squadron and per day. Who used it was clear. The RAF's 2nd Tactical Air Force led with Typhoon wings under 83 Group and 84 Group. Fighter wings from the Royal Canadian Air Force also flew the type and the method. On the ground, Polish 1st Armored Division, Canadian 4th Armored Division, and British Infantry Divisions called in strikes. The chain crossed services but ran on short words over radio nets. Who invented it could be drawn in a few lines. The projectile work was led by Royal Aircraft Establishment teams and the Projectile Development Establishment, with Royal Ordnance handling manufacture of the 60-pound heads. The rails and wiring looms were refined by Hawker and service workshops. Trials in 1942 and 1943 against target hulks and soil revetments set angles and fuses. Test reports held by ERAE were the witness objects, and their figures fed the March, 1944. Range tables carried into Normandy. Cost entered the method in a quiet way. A 60-pound head used less scarce alloy than a heavy bomb and fewer machining hours per unit. The motor casing was simple. The fuse was a known pattern. A rough estimate put labor hours per rocket well under the labor per 500-pound bomb. That meant stocks could support firing 4 to 8 per aircraft without rationing. Depot ledgers for August 1944 show the drawdowns as lines of numbers and initials. Failure modes had to be accepted. Misfires left live rockets on rails after landing, and ground crews had to safe them by procedure. Duds hit verges without detonation and still forced drivers to swerve. In rare cases, a rocket left a rail late and a blast near the tail came close. Safety notes in squadron files warned about holding the firing button too long. A maintenance card with an ink blot showed an entry for a hung store on the 15th. The field test tease was implicit in the week's events. The method would be judged not by theory, but by 3 places on 3 dates. One would be a bend near Saint-Lambert on the 14th of August. One would be a choke point and drizzle near Troon on the 15th. One would be a wing-level pivot on the 16th when a whole road net went quiet for an hour. The witness objects were ready. AAR pages, aerial mosaics, and a decoded signal log that matched the times. The first field test sat on the Saint-Lambert-Chambois bend on the 14th of August, 1944, in thin drizzle at first light. The road pinched between a hedge and a culvert, with the Dives River wetting the ditch stones. A rover controller with the Polish 1st Armored Division marked the bend with a grease pencil on a photo mosaic and called the cab rank. 2 Typhoons from No. 198 Squadron came in from the west at around 800 feet, released in a long ripple, and climbed out toward low cloud. Aerial reconnaissance at mid-morning fixed the effect. 2 soft skins and 1 gun tractor burned nose to ditch, and the lane stayed blocked for roughly 40 minutes. The witness object was the annotated mosaic with the controller's X and the print time in the margin. The second field test grew out of weather on the 15th of August, when cloud sat thick over Troon. Visibility ran to under 1 mile along the lane east of Magny, and the hedges trapped smoke. A Canadian rover controller put smoke on the culvert and walked the Typhoons onto it by compass bearing. Two aircraft from No. 247 Squadron fired 4 rockets each at about 700 yards and pulled hard left. The decoded signal summary for the hour recorded the strike, the culvert, and a request for a repeat. One culvert spalled, one trailer jackknifed, and the road went quiet long enough for Canadian artillery to switch fire to the next bend. The third field test came with a doctrine pivot on the 16th of August, when 83 Group tasked a wing to hold one road net silent by rhythm rather than wait. 1-2. One wing ran pairs over the Chambois box at fixed 15-minute slots from late morning to early evening. Pilots were told to aim at the second and third vehicles and to accept bursts short as long as the lane broke. A wing summary that night counted the road quiet for an hour south of Coudehard and attached 2 gun camera frames to the page as evidence. The single hard number in the margin was 8 rockets per aircraft expended for 4 scheduled cycles. Between these dates stood the method's other tests in miniature. On the 14th, one Typhoon returned to B8 with one hung store after a wet contact misfire. The maintenance card for that serial showed the armorer's initials and a note to clean the rail switch. On the 15th, a pilot from 609 Squadron logged a release at 900 yards with crosswind drift 1 vehicle width. His combat report fixed the limit and still matched the culvert strike on the Mosaic. On the 16th, an operational research section officer measured crater spacing near a hedge gap and chalked 30 yards on a board before the squadron briefing began. A logistics vignette framed the tempo without adjectives. At Bazenville B4, 2 on the 15th of August, an armament corporal staged 60-pound heads in 4s on a flatbed and laid out nose fuses in tins. He checked continuity on 8 rails with a hand tester, logged 1 fail, and swapped the lead to clear the fault. The production tally for the day showed a draw of over 200 rockets to supply 3 squadrons, and fuel bowsers cycled every 20 minutes in the rain. The paper trail was plain: a signed tally, a line on a Form 700, and a wing dispersal schedule. Terrain and conditions wrote the other half of the record. The Dives Valley hedges made smoke cling at hedge height, which cut sight picture after the first pass. Wet verges sprayed mud into the air, and rockets set to point detonating kicked that mud into sheets that looked like hits until the wind thinned them. Low ceiling forced release between 500 and 1,000 feet, which held angles shallow and made pattern elongation a feature rather than a defect. The constraint showed in every gun camera reel that week: long, flat shots stitched along verges rather than steep dives onto single hulls. Case 1. Defense cracks. At the Saint-Lambert bend on the 14th of August, German light flak opened with short bursts from a hedgerow orchard as the first Typhoon rolled in at around 800 feet. The pilot held the sight low on the verge and walked 8 rockets forward with 3 detonations straddling the culvert. 2 soft skins ignited, and an anti-tank gun crew ran off the trail into the hedge gap. A second pair fired into the smoke and widened the block by 30 yards. The witness object was the late-morning aerial Mosaic with 2 black scars across the lane and a grease pencil arrow. Case 2, choke point under Weather Edge near Troon on the 15th of August. Drizzle cut contrast and hid the exact aim point, so the rover controller put a smoke round on the culvert and read out a bearing and distance from a road fork. 2 Typhoons from No. 2. 4-7 Squadron accepted the correction and released at about 700 yards, with 1 salvo short and 1 on. The culvert face spalled, a trailer jackknifed, and the column behind halted for roughly 20 minutes while men tried to drag the wreckage clear with a half-track. The decoded signal log carried the time group, the on-target note, and the request to hold artillery until movement resumed. The single hard number was 4 rockets per aircraft. Case 3, doctrine pivot at wing level near Coudehard on the 16th of August. 1-2. One wing ran a timed pattern, with pairs arriving every quarter hour and aiming at the second vehicle in any visible group. The goal was not total destruction, but silence along the lane for a measured window, so the Polish positions on Mont Ormel Ridge could breathe. The wing summary recorded road quiet for 1 hour, and an ORS officer measured crater strings at about 40 yards, spacing along the verge. The object on the page was a wing diary entry stapled to a gun camera, still of rockets, leaving rails in shallow profile. The number in the margin was 8 rockets per aircraft for 4 cycles. Myth versus evidence, tied to a witness object, needed one clear line. Many after-action tales spoke of rockets breaking tanks by the score in the pocket. The ORS tabulation for 16 to 21 August, filed with range tables, showed most rocket kills were soft skins, towed guns, and parked vehicles. The morale effect on tank crews was large in prisoner reports, but the metal evidence did not show mass armor loss to rockets. The correction came from a counted sample rather than memory, and the page carried dates and map refs in neat columns. It did not diminish the weapon's road denial role. It fixed it. Training adjustments appeared on paper the same day they were tried. On the 15th, a squadron note told pilots to aim on the second or third vehicle, not the lead, and to fire in ripples rather than singles. On the 16th, a range table addendum reminded crews that at 600 yards, the rocket line rose slightly. The note said to hold low on the verge to place bursts into ditches and culvert faces. The maintenance bay added one step to the post-sortie routine: wipe rail contacts dry and retest continuity before rearming. The 3 papers sat together in the squadron binder: flying note, range addendum, and armament instruction. By the 17th of August, 1944, the test pattern had become a routine. Rovernets kept a cab rank above Chambois and a second stack near Troon. Canadian 4th Armored Division and Polish 1st Armored Division called strikes as soon as dust plumes showed on road gaps. The hours between 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon saw the densest traffic on the radios, and turnarounds held near 40 minutes at B8 and B42. The rhythm mattered more than any single pass, and it showed in the decoded signal summaries where the intervals matched the wing plans. The field tests thus wrote their own report across 3 dates and 3 places and tied to 3 kinds of paper. Photo mosaics pinned the burned soft skins and culverts. Wing diaries and AAR pages fixed times, rocket counts, and patterns. Decoded rover logs matched map boxes to minutes. The numbers inside that paperwork, 8 rockets, 1 culvert face spalled, 40 minutes of silence, were small on their own and large in convoy terms. The pocket's roads did not empty. They stalled, and stalling under fire was the new rule. The first countermove came at dusk on the 14th of August, when German march tables shifted columns to night movement and doubled hedge cover at staging points. Camouflage nets went over softskins, and dummy loads sat by road edges to draw fire. Light flak sections massed near bends with better arcs. The effect was partial. Cab ranks still flew until last light, and the shallow rocket profile did not need bright targets to break culverts and verges. By the 15th, more counters appeared. Columns tried farm tracks to bypass blocked lanes, and half-tracks cut across dry fields where hedges allowed. Drivers pushed spacing toward 50 meters to reduce cluster losses. Yet, heavy vehicles still returned to the roads where culverts, bridges, and firm ground existed, and those roads were the very lines sketched on the photo mosaics and artillery maps. The old rule bent but did not repair itself. A hard limit showed in every squadron binder. Accuracy against a single moving tank was poor at low level in broken country. Semi-armor-piercing heads could crack thin overhead plates and light armor, but front plates at good angles beat most hits unless range, angle, and luck aligned. Operational research counted few tank kills attributable to rockets between the 14th and the 21st of August, 1944. The morale effect was real and recorded in prisoner summaries, but medal counts told another story. Another limit sat in the weather and the height gate. Low ceiling locked release heights between 500 and 1,000 feet, and crosswinds nudged rockets wide by a vehicle width or more at 700 yards. Flak stitched the approach lanes, and under those conditions, some pilots fired early or too high. A maintenance card line on the 15th recorded a hung store and a cracked rail fairing from a late release. The risk was routine, not rare. Fuel margins also narrowed with loiter, and engines rough ran in wet air at low throttle. The Germans tried smoke as a shield, setting fuel drums alight near choke points. It hid outlines, but also marked the exact place where a road bent or dipped, and pilots used the smoke as a beacon. Decoys cut canvas shells over carts, fooled a few passes, and AAR pages noted bursts short into decoy row. The next pass aimed at the culvert or the second vehicle in the real column, and the block returned. Smoke and tricks bought minutes, not hours. Refinements on the Allied side were quick, dated, and plain. On the 15th of August, a wing order standardized ripple firing. All 8 rockets to leave in 1 or 2 trains, with sight held low on the near verge to drive bursts into ditches and culvert faces. On the 16th, armorers set a default to point detonating fuse for soft-skin interdiction, reserving semi-armor-piercing heads for specific calls. On the 17th, Group circulated a 1-page memo that told pilots to accept near misses if the aim held the lane shut. The memo quoted range tables from March 1944 and attached 1 gun camera still. Training shifts followed in the dispersals. In dusk briefings, instructors drew chalk roads on tarmac and underlined the second vehicle aim point. They drilled release discipline, no singles, no hunting for a lone tank under cloud, and no pull-out below 500 feet. Armorers added a wipe and test step for rails after each sortie and logged misfires by serial. The witness objects were the chalked boards, the typed flying notes, and the armament sheets with initials and times. A cost beat landed across the same pages. On the 15th of August, 3 Typhoons did not return from flak-heavy lanes near Troon and Kudahard. The wing diary wrote the serials without comment. On the 16th, 2 more aircraft bellied in at advanced landing grounds with undercarriage damage after low pullouts. Maintenance cards recorded bent fittings and cracked skins. Ground crews worked past midnight under blackout to return machines to line. The production tallies for rockets drew down another 200 heads to keep the rhythm in the air. A constraint on coordination emerged as Allied ground forces pressed into the pocket. Forward lines ran close to the roads, and rover controllers tightened approval to avoid short rounds into friendly verges. The decoded signal summaries show more hold calls in the hours around noon on the 17th and 18th as Polish positions on Mont Ormel Ridge fought at close range to the lanes. The solution was not to stop, but to clamp the boxes tighter and shorten the cab rank stacks. The numbers shifted, but the interdiction rhythm stayed. Myth versus evidence, with a paper spine, needed restating during the week. A rumor said that rockets alone sealed the pocket. The ORS daily sheets argued otherwise with lists of artillery interdiction fires, engineer road cuts, and ground blocks by Canadian and Polish units. Rockets forced pauses and broke softskins and guns in clusters. Artillery and ground troops turned pauses into captures and closures. The page laid the rolls side by side and put times next to map pins. German counters did harm. Flak belts near certain bends thickened, and pilots began to recognize the shapes of guns in orchard shadows. A wing flying note on the 17th told pairs to vary approach headings and altitudes to avoid patterned flak solutions. When dusk fell, columns moved more freely, but night fighter bombers with bombs and guns took some of the work. The load shifted. It did not vanish. Refinement by route change closed the act. Group began tasking some Typhoons to work road nets farther east toward the Seine to keep bridges from stacking too deep under night movement. Rover controllers handed off boxes by time group, and decoded signals show a clean relay at set minutes between controllers. The count of rockets expended per day rose into the high hundreds across 2 wings, with Form 700 lines backing the totals. The Sledgehammer stayed light enough, cheap enough, and fast enough to swing again and again. Immediate outcomes reached the ledger first. Between the 14th and the 21st of August, 1944, the Saint-Lambert-Troon-Chambois roadnet carried fewer intact softskins by the hour, and the gaps in movement lined up with cab rank times. Aerial mosaics from the 15th and 16th showed burned trucks at culverts and bends, and decoded signal summaries timed the quiet windows at 20 to 60 minutes. Polish reports from Mont Ormel Ridge, Hill 262, logged relief in pressure during the quarter hours after rocket runs. Those minutes added up, and the pocket's exits narrowed into choke points. By the 19th of August, the Polish 1st Armored Division held the ridge under constant counterattack, while Canadian 4th Armored Division closed from the northwest and American 91st Infantry Division pushed up from the south. Rover controllers with the Canadians and Poles called Typhoons onto lanes that fed those attacks. Wing diaries counted sorties in 3 digits across 2 days, with 8 rockets per aircraft as the standard load. The pattern kept convoys from reforming behind the immediate fight. On the 20th of August, bridges and fords west of the Seine showed stacked vehicles on aerial photos. Ferry manifests captured later at the river named units delayed by hours, and the times on those sheets matched the decode times of rover calls around Troon and Coudehard. The map pins linked, road nets inside the pocket silent in pulses, bridges to the east clogged in pulses, and ground units seizing crossings in the gaps. The operational research section connected those pins in a quiet paragraph that never used a boast. The closure date carries weight and ink. On the 21st of August, 1944, the pocket closed near Chambois, when Polish and American units met and held. German groups still escaped in fragments, and many fought out through fields at night, but the organized columns that needed roads had broken. Rocket logs, artillery fire plans, and engineer block maps all sit in the same week's folders. None alone sealed the pocket. Together, they set the tempo in the end. Operationally, the effect was measured in tempo and resource shifts. Canadian and Polish artillery used fewer emergency fire missions on roads during rocket cycles, according to battery logs. Engineers reported fewer forced bridge demolitions under pressure on the lanes typhoons worked, and more deliberate cuts where time allowed. Ground traffic on Allied roads moved with fewer pauses when rover nets held the boxes quiet. The travel time between forward ammunition points and firing lines fell by tens of minutes in those windows. The numbers are small on each page and large in aggregate because every hour in August mattered. Cost and strain trailed the gains and deserved their place. Typhoon losses to flak rose on heavy days, with wing diaries writing serials on the 15th, 16th, and 17th. Ground crews burned through stocks of 60-pound heads. Production tallies showed draws in the high hundreds for the week. Armorers' hands cracked from fuel and rain, and maintenance cards filled with rail switch entries and hung store safing notes. The sledgehammer worked, but it wore the arms that swung it. Legacy ran forward in 3 lines: doctrine, technology, and training. Doctrinally, the cab rank plus rover control became a model for close air support and interdiction, later called by different names but similar in shape. The idea of holding a kill lane quiet in pulses, timed to ground movement, appears in post-war manuals with new charts and radios. The map box, the timed cycle, and the second vehicle aim point survived paper changes. Technologically, the rocket path continued. The RP-3 gave way to other unguided rockets of similar size and purpose, and later to guided weapons that solved the accuracy limit that operational research had marked in Normandy. The 60-pound head's cheap power became a design note: low unit cost, high firing rate, and shallow angle delivery. Post-war air forces carried that note into inventories where helicopters and jets both fired rockets down road axes at field targets. Training pulled the week's lessons into schedules. Range tables added shallow angle drills and second vehicle aim point diagrams. Armament sections wrote new checklists that put continuity tests and rail wipes in bold type. Forward air controllers trained with ground brigades on photo mosaics and radio brevity, building the habit that had kept Saint-Lambert's Bend quiet in those quarter hours. The witness objects for that pull-through are mundane: range cards with smudged corners, typed checklists with coffee rings, and course programs with dates in the headings. Myth against evidence closes the loop in the same tone it used to open it. Stories grew fast that rockets alone broke armored columns at Falaise. The counted pages never say that. They say rockets broke softskins and guns in clusters, shut lanes for minutes that mattered, and pushed morale down in units already under artillery and ground attack. They say armor was less often destroyed than parked and scuttled or forced off roads. The truth on paper is stronger than stories because it names places, times, and counts, and it fits with the other papers from the same week. Aftermath settled on the same map pin where this story opened. The Saint-Lambert road dried under late August sun once the pocket closed. Hedgerows stood where the smoke had sat, and the culvert faced north with a fresh patch of stone. Aerial photos from the 23rd showed empty verges, and decoded nets went quiet. The bend looked ordinary again, but a rule had changed there. A road under low cloud was no longer safe if a wing could put 4 to 8 rockets onto the second truck at shallow angle. Dates anchor the end because they anchored the middle. 14th, 15th, 16th, 19th, and 21st of August, 1944, sit in a line. Units anchor at 2. Polish 1st Armored Division on the ridge, Canadian 4th Armored Division on the roads, American 90th Infantry Division at the southern gate, and RAF Typhoon squadrons turning between Bazenville and Sommervieux. Places keep their shapes: Saint-Lambert-sur-Dives, Troon, Coudhard, Chambois, Mont-Ormel, and the Dives River. The paperwork remains in order. AAR pages, wing diaries, ORS sheets, range tables, production tallies, decoded signals, and together they make the sledgehammer feel exact. The stillness that followed did not cancel the noise that made it. It absorbed it. A culvert repaired, a lane swept, a hedge unburned, and a field left to stubble. The rule that broke on that bend stayed broken in the manuals that followed, even as rockets and radios changed shape. The map pin remains the quiet answer to the old rule's last question. Where did it fail first, and why?